Mark Despotakis is our moderator. Mark is one of the stalwart friends and leaders for the Pennsylvania Arts Education Network. He's Director of Market Development for Progressive Music in McKeesport, Western Pennsylvania. His bio includes a lot of excellent advocacy work at the state level as well as at the national level, particularly through NAM. But he really has been one of the leaders with the work of the Pennsylvania Music Education Association. He has served them in various roles, including as Advancement of Music Education Council Chair since 2013. He's worked with Progressive Music as Director of Market Development since 2002. Prior to those roles, he was Assistant Band Director in the Baldwin-Whitehall School District for nearly 12 years, and he has worked as an intern and freelancer with CNN News, and has worked as a publication assistant for the Daily News, a publication in Western Pennsylvania. Mark earned a bachelor's degree in communication from Clarion University of Pennsylvania, and again has been, since the outset, one of the leaders for the Pennsylvania Arts Education Network, and we're glad to have him as a partner. Mark, thanks very much for your work today.
Thank you, Ron. Thank you all for sticking around. I know it's been a really long day and a lot of information being poured into your heads and thrown at you. So we're going to do a little bit more of that for you over the next hour or so. So kind of what I was thinking about is, as I was thinking about doing a town hall. So we mentioned I was at CNN at one point, so I'm still this CNN junkie. So if you ever watch CNN when they do these in the evening, they'll do like an hour town hall on some subject area. And they do this really deep dive into like the opioid crisis or healthcare. And I watch these things and I'm like, oh, I wish they would do one on education at some point, or I wish they would do particularly on the arts and education, because they do this really deep dive, and I think people have some thirst for that. And so what they do is they'll bring some experts in to talk, sometimes politicians, sometimes people outside of politics, and they'll bring in an audience. And they'll encourage members of those audience, the audience, to ask questions, and then they'll have Jake Tapper and Dana Bash up there moderating it. So I'm going to play your Jake and Dana today, and I'm going to try to ask some questions, but I really encourage you to ask some questions too, so that we make this very much a discussion. So there's a microphone set up there. If at any point you have something that you would like to ask, a comment, just come up to the mic, and I'll keep my my left eye to that, and we'll definitely bring you in. So, but don't worry, I have a lot of questions too. So what we're going to do to begin with is I want these folks here to introduce themselves. So this is a pretty esteemed panel of some education leaders, and we can talk specifically to the arts of who we have up here as well. So starting with Mark, we'll just have you introduce yourself a little bit. We'll go right down the table.
Thanks, Mark. My name is Mark Stutz, and I'm the Director of Visual and Performing Arts for Parkland School District, which is a suburban school district right outside the city of Allentown. Serves about 9,000 to 10,000 students. My capacity there is to take care of art, visual arts, dance, what there is of dance, theater, music, and anything else you can refer to in the way of arts, from K through 12. So it's a staffing situation, it's a scheduling situation. We'll talk about some of the access things, how we get our kids access to art outside of the school, and also having our students be out in the community. So it's a great job, and got a very supportive school district. Thanks.
Joe?
Good afternoon. My name is Joe Clapper. I'm the Assistant Executive Director for the Pennsylvania Principals Association. That's an association that are members of 3,500 members in Pennsylvania. About 80% of them are either principals or assistant principals. The remainder tend to be other folks that are working in central office. Prior to my work as assistant executive director, I was 25 years as school administrator in Pennsylvania. 10 as a principal, 5 as an assistant superintendent, and for the last 10, a school superintendent in Quaker Valley School District, which is about 12 miles northwest of Pittsburgh. So I'm glad to be here.
My name's Rich Askey. I'm the Vice President for Pennsylvania State Education Association. We have 181,000 members across the state that we represent public school employees ranging from teachers to cafeteria workers, social workers, therapists, the whole gambit. But I think more important, the reason I'm on this panel is because of my pride and joy of my life of being a 30-year music teacher for the Harrisburg School District. And I was able during that time, for 10 years, I served as the coordinator for the music and art program, which of course brought many challenges when you're in a low wealth, high needs district like Harrisburg.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Shannon Wagner. I am the superintendent in the Burrell School District. Burrell is a small suburban school district north of Pittsburgh, about 20 miles north of Pittsburgh, about 1,800 kids. We're small enough to be nimble, which I appreciate. It allows us to shift and move with trends. And although it does bring along some other constraints, which all districts face as well in finances and things, but we really focus on trying to get our students to engage their passions, which means that the arts become a forefront of what we do every day.
So let me take a little bit offshoot of that point there. So here you have a district that is saying, yes, we realize the value of the arts, and obviously we see that in so many districts that say that and aren't necessarily doing as much as you're doing, and not only saying it, but they're doing it. So it becomes, there's this question of access to the arts, okay? So maybe what's the utopian view of what access to the arts would be in a realistic fashion, if you will, of how does it fit into the school day? If you could be king of the world and make those decisions, and I'll just throw this out to anyone, how do you see the arts fitting in to a regular school day, obviously keeping in mind these other subject areas are important?
Do you mind if I continue on that? Well, first I'll say a little bit of a story. My school board obviously is very supportive, and about 5 years ago we put in a new weight room for the athletic teams. $55,000 expenditure. One of my board members spoke up and said, when are we going to spend this much on the arts? So you can see the environment that I'm already in. I already have an excellent board who cares about students having the access. Now, when I think of what does art look like, yes, we have art education, music education, all of those things going, but I believe that it should permeate everything a child does. So for instance, a child in a history class should be able to express themselves through their passion, which may be painting, to explain content that they have understood in their history class. Yes, there probably should be a writing piece that supports that, maybe an artist statement or something like that, but they should be able to express themselves throughout content areas using the art or their passions that they have embraced outside of the school, because so often we make them either do it outside of school, where they're painting or singing or doing all of those things outside, or we make them do it in silos at school in specific classes. And really it should permeate everything they do when it's a passion.
So let me follow up on that. I can already tell I want to duplicate you times 500 and put you in every district in Pennsylvania, because you get it, obviously, just from that answer. So I think there's a lot of people who are saying, boy, I wish something like that would happen in my district. So what's the conversation for an arts educator to go and have with their superintendent, their director of curriculum, whatever it might be? What's the conversation to try to implement what you've been so successful at making happen?
You have to find evidence. So whether it's in student work that you bring and show after an art teacher has done, maybe partnered with a content area teacher and done some really neat interdisciplinary things that now they can show the superintendent and push in a certain direction. My art and music people got together and started a thing that they call BAM Night, which is Burrell Arts and Music Night. And I think the biggest evidence in the world, we did this just for fun, K-12, art and music on display, planned for 300 to 400 people. Now we have 1,800 students in our district. We had over 2,000 people come in and out of that event. So I believe that this, when you talk about art, music, any of these encore, we call these encores, any of these kind of expressions that a child does within a school setting, parents are interested in. They see this as something valuable, and they will come out to see this before they'll come out to see a math test any given day. So I believe that we need to you show them the evidence, and then you'll start to see a change in the climate of what your parents expect and what your board is willing to see. Go to a board meeting. Show evidence so the board gets on board as well. Don't be afraid to stand in front and say, here's what my kids are doing. This is why this is such a great idea to have social studies and art blended together. Obviously, everybody knows that those are good teaching practices as well, but evidence to show them how much the arts matter, I think, is what's number one.
And I love that idea of the arts and the music people came together to make this happen, because we talk so much about the math folks are siloed from the arts folks, but sometimes the visual arts folks are siloed from the music folks. So that's a great starting point.
I think your idea is great, and it's been my goal for 15 years to change the cover of this from arts and to arts in education, because I go to those conferences, because to me arts integration is by all means the key. I think the challenge you have with a larger school district, and certainly mine's a lot smaller than Philadelphia or Harrisburg, but we do service 10,000 kids, and we have 9 elementary schools, and in our school, and 2 middle schools and a high school, and there becomes the desire by the administration, the people that I work for, to want parity, to have everything be the same. So it's very hard for me to signal, like I may have a principal that really wants to get on board with that. But if I don't get 9 elementary principals to go on board with it, it's not going to fly. So my question for maybe you out there is, what would you do to get and I have a very supportive board, budget-wise. They were honored here a couple of years ago. They're very, very supportive with everything we do with the arts. But you saying it, they're siloed, okay? We have band for band and orchestra for orchestra, and never the twain shall meet, because there's not enough time in the day for some of them unless we hire more people, competent people, or more importantly, have our class teachers, especially in elementary, taught how to integrate arts and be assisted by some of our encore teachers, as we call them. So I think that's really a big difference with the flexibility of a small car versus a big van. You can get around the corners quicker. So there is that issue. Now, as far as getting it together, we've been doing that for years. Those of you who know me long enough know that we have a 3-day festival where all the arts and all the district get together for 3 days, and it's a major community event anymore. So I think that's a great way to bring people into the idea of arts and education working together.
I think one of the things that we did in Harrisburg, which is important to do, is make sure the teachers talk to each other. We implemented common planning time where I, as a music teacher, would go in and meet with the 3rd grade team to see what they were doing, or at the high school level, maybe the social studies department. And there would be conversations facilitated in there that talked about what their curriculum was, what the arts curriculum was, and how we could time it so that they would come together and we could focus on the same type of subject and piggyback of each other. And we found that to be very successful in integrating the arts into the main curriculum.
Let me piggyback a little bit on what you just said, Rich. I've always believed, and I did this as a superintendent too, that the art, when you talk about core curriculum, you usually tend to think about English language arts and math and sciences, etc. But really, the arts is also core curriculum. We shouldn't be thinking, used to have curriculum people come to me, curriculum leaders, and say, how can we sort of make music fit into English and make it all fit into this? I kind of get that, but on the other hand, they don't sit around and have that discussion about math. How do we make math fit into the social studies curriculum? you know, music, the arts, stands alone. It stands alone, and it is what it is. And you know what folks do in math and English and language arts and the sciences? They spend an enormous amount of time planning about a K-12 program and how to meet the needs of students. We don't do that too enough in K-12 education with the arts. And I really think that's a missing piece a lot of times, that folks are not spending enough time planning specifically about what it is we expect kids to learn, experience, et cetera, about the arts in a K-12 environment.
So how do we move the needle on that? Because that is definitively a common question, and the subjects that you named, for sure, are get the preferential treatment, and we know why. There's standardized testing for those, and I don't think anyone in this room is going to suggest a standardized test for arts or music to bring us to that level. But how do we then remember that, yeah, in the law, arts and now music are listed as core academic subjects right up there with ELA, math, science, all of those, phys ed. How do we change the conversation then?
Well, it's being changed before our very eyes, actually, to some degree, and that is I continue to hear folks talk about No Child Left Behind. You know, that's not around any longer. We now have ESSA, and an ESSA plan has been submitted by PDE to Washington, and if you follow in Pennsylvania, our illustrious politicians in Harrisburg who are on the Senate Education Committee, House Education Committee, have already poo-pooed what was sent to Washington, D.C. So it's going to be up in the air a little bit. But in the end, ESSA really gives a lot more latitude to schools to kind of create their own standards and goals and what you ought to be all about. So I think the door is open. And so I would say pay attention to that in your school. When you hear ESSA and hear about the law and all of that, don't just like turn away from that automatically and say it really doesn't have anything to do with me. It does have to do with you and should have to do with you. So I'd say pay attention. When you get a chance to sit on a curriculum committee or be part of something for the greater good, by all means, do it in your school.
We're going to come back to that ESSA point later.
I just think that I agree, and one of the things that, maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, one of these, we were talking about slows and things like that for the music and the art, and there's a lot of unhappy people sitting in meetings. We don't want to be tested, we don't want all this, but the reality is, and I feel this way, that you are core. And if you're a core subject, you need to be evaluated in somehow. You can't just say, yeah, we're fine because I tested the range of our students and what they sing. There needs to be something to measure it against. We had the opportunity, or probably still have the opportunity, as you said, to create that. David talked to me that a long time ago. You're in the forefront of creating your own standard. So why let Harrisburg set your standard for you, because they're going to expect each student to draw a face with 2 eyes and nose, everything centered, and where the expression of that may make it off balance. And that doesn't make it wrong, that just makes it their artistic interpretation. So I think don't fight, become part of the construction of the standards for your school.
Yeah, and that's a local thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because last year or so, I had a discussion with someone here in Harrisburg, and I won't name the person, but it's someone very powerful in education, in the Department of Education. I'll leave it at that. And the discussion was, what about some idea of a graduation requirement in the arts? And I was cautioned that that's not a great idea, because the folks coming from the state level, because the folks just a few blocks from us here are not the people we want deciding what is in that. So to your point, I think that's very important. How do you then take that and make that work in your district? And exactly what you're saying. Take the standards and make them work in your district.
I think everyone, I always talk to my music teachers and say, when When's the last time you did a study of your curriculum? Things have changed. Don't let it be an old curriculum someplace in a dusty drawer that you don't have to follow because no one really does it. We just sort of have it and it's okay. There needs to be a curriculum. If you have a theater program in your high school and you have theater 1, 2, 3, and 4, then there has to be a growth between 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay? And the art programs, they need to be going somewhere, not just fun time. They should be fun, but that's not the only purpose of that. There's a purpose there to create some interest so people can then see if they want to do this later on. And I think that for us, it's a matter of showing that we can have the numbers to prove it. The numbers as far as students that want to do it when it becomes an elective in the high school.
Yeah, it's that interesting dichotomy then of you're not necessarily saying we're going to judge or have an administrator judge how good this artwork is, but to the administrator, the judging how good the program is the numbers.
Correct.
Yeah, yeah. Any other thoughts on that? Okay, so Rich, did you have something?
Well, I was just going to say maybe a little bit off topic, but I know we used to look at our curriculum continually, and one of the reasons that we needed to do that was because of where we were and the fact that our kids moved from one school to the other constantly. So as music teachers and as art teachers, we wanted to be sure when Johnny came into our building from the school across the city, we knew what Johnny had going for him when he came into our room, and he could fit in and feel comfortable in our classrooms right away.
One of the things that I see in school districts along those lines that concerns me is that a whole music department across a district is not necessarily talking to each other, and not because they don't like each other. It's just the nature of the beast, and many districts don't have an art supervisor or a music supervisor who is tasked with that. So I would imagine the folks in this room are not those type of people because you're here. So that already says something about you and what your concern is for that. But, how do we encourage those that aren't like that to be very proactive, to say, look, you've got to somehow work together, not only with your own departments, but within your whole school community, and talk about arts in education. How do we make that happen?
You have to design it. You have to specifically, it just can't be happenstance. It has to be scheduled. It has to be a part of who you are and what you do. Once again, I don't go back to the core curriculum idea, but the math and the science teachers, the ELA teachers, they don't just sit around and say, well, I guess maybe we ought to get together once in a while. They schedule it. They make it happen. It's purposeful. And so I would say, by all means, please do that.
And so there's an argument right there to take to a principal,
It
to
is.
say, you are being very deliberate in these other subject areas, so can you make time for us to be deliberate in our subject area? Yeah.
That's where I was going to go with this question. I think when we provide professional development to our teachers, who do we neglect the most? We neglect our arts, our music, all of the theater tech people. We neglect all of those people, the phys ed people. So the number one thing I think as an administrator and a board that we have to do is make sure that we are finding ways to provide meaningful professional development to the people in those departments, and that changes the tide because then they grow in they become more confident in their craft and what they're doing, and know that they are held just as equal as the math or the science teacher. And I can say this because I've seen it happen within our small little district, and it won't be a shameful plug, but it is a shameful plug for the Arts Ed Collaborative. We brought the Arts Ed Collaborative in to work with our art and music teachers to start. Our arts and music teachers thought I was probably going to eliminate their programs or something like that we were trying to downsize or something, but it wasn't about that. It was about revitalizing and breathing new life into those programs. And the Arts Ed Collaborative now has worked with my arts and music people for 3 years. First year was the self-assessment. The second year, they looked at curriculum and aligned curriculum, K-12, and worked together to do that. And then this last year, they've learned and worked with assessment, which we often tend to grade compliance in these areas as well. And we have to be careful as educators we're not doing that, and that we're actually grading kids on standards and not just giving them a grade because they came to the class. And so now we're working on phys ed as well. And if the Arts Ed Collaborative expands to other areas, we will follow them wherever they go, because they have been the best professional development that we've ever had in the Burrell School District for any group of teachers. So I think it shows those subject areas that they are valued, and then they rise up and they're willing to do things that they would have never done before, because they were always, the hidden black sheep of the family or something, versus everybody else. So I think it's in the PD and what you get them to understand as teachers and value as teachers.
So did you see a change in your teachers from 3 years ago till now?
Absolutely. I even lost a couple teachers in the process because they didn't like the direction that we were going, because it scared them, because they had been, and I don't want to offend anybody, but we didn't want, I don't want at Halloween a bunch of pumpkins in the hallway that are just different colors. That is not, it's not arts and crafts. It is art. It is music. It is PE that's creative and energetic, and that the kids enjoy. So we were getting away from having that, and we actually we look at the national standards, not even the PA standards, for this type of thing. And we scared a couple away, for sure. But then we were able to hire people that align to our vision. I've got an art teacher that has a dance minor. How cool is that? I've got a health teacher that we just hired. Couldn't find one that necessarily had a lot of dance in her background, but she favors movement. So health class is not just about health. They get up and they move. So it's because we empowered them through the Arts Ed Collaborative. It was nothing that I could do on my own, or nothing that any of my curriculum people could do on their own, because we're all, quite frankly, science and math and social studies and English people.
And there's this, I see a lot of teacher burnout, especially in the arts and music, and they are probably the people that are making the different colored pumpkins at Halloween. And there's a variety of reasons for that, and maybe it's not all that teacher's fault. And I would imagine that many of you see that. You maybe have a colleague that's like that, where you're the one who's really trying to push a program forward, and you have colleagues that are not doing that as much. So I think PD is one way that an administration can kind of infuse that in there. Are there any other thoughts? Because that's a real world challenge for many of you.
We have the professional learning communities, a pretty big thing in our schools, bigger than anyone else's schools, PLCs. So the PLC's science, specific science, like 9th grade biology teachers get together, 10th grade chem teachers get together. But instead they were throwing my band orchestra and choral teacher into a room, and they have nothing in common. They're friends, but their PLC meant nothing. So my department chair, who happens to be a choral director, said, well, why can't I go down to the middle school, since that's who's feeding our program, and work with them on curricular change and stuff. So now our PLCs for music and art resemble how they're done they're not stuck together with just the high school, because you have, even in the art, we have a digital guy, we have someone that does crafts. They don't have a lot in common. So let's bring the other teachers up and do that. Also, talking about professional development, on Columbus Day Monday, for the last 3 or 4 years, I think, we've sponsored a district, not district, our district, district-wide, District 10 or 11, whichever we're in, I don't even know, PD for all the music teachers. We bring in outside speakers, and we're sponsored by Zeswitz and by String Tree and things like that. We have a really nice, like 100 some odd people come up for professional development from different schools. So I think that's a nice thing also.
Any other thoughts on that?
Well, just I remember when Harrisburg was first targeted as a low-performing district, there was this effort to all of a sudden PD for music teachers and art teachers disappeared, because the building leadership wanted the arts teachers in their building for professional development and there was a frustration among the teachers of the art and music. They didn't know what they were. But the fallout of that was that the teachers did start to have burnout. They started to not be as engaged as to what they should be doing in the classroom. So we did have a discussion with administration that, I'll phrase it as a discussion, and we eventually convinced the district leadership to NCLB, you know, whatever it is, but. And we started doing the kind of professional development where we got the entire department together. We made sure instrumental teachers were together from K-12 so they could talk about how they can support each other. And we really did start to see the music teachers, the art teachers become more engaged in what they were doing. We started to see new ideas come forward, and we did lose it. I agree with you. We did lose a few because the pressure was on, to be honest with you. But hey, you know, that's what it's all about. But that, I think what you have to do is give the folks the resources, including what are we here for, what are we doing, and what are we teaching, and how do we teach it. And then you avoid those kind of burnouts and lack of engagement and in your teachers.
So, okay, a lot of this we're saying is about having that conversation with your administrators about what to do in your program. So I want to kind of direct this to the superintendent and the principal level here. So what do you wish that teachers knew, and maybe kind of specifically for our conversation, arts teachers knew about the pressures that you're under? Because it's not like you walk into your office and say, well, this is everything we're going to do in our school district today, and you can make every decision and it changes like that. What do you wish they knew that so they could be informed coming to have a conversation with you about their programs? I stumped them.
I would say, I'm going to speak as both as a principal and a superintendent here, just not to be unappreciative of everyone else's programs. That's all. That, you know, everybody feels that what they do is important. And if you don't, then you probably are in the wrong business. And so I don't know that it ought to be. I never liked the comparison thing all that much. I just tell me what your needs are, you know, and be vocal about it. I had a real quick story. One time when I was a superintendent, I had a music teacher come up to me and tell me finally what it is that she was upset about. And she said, I really want this. And I can't even remember what it was. And I said, what's the first time I ever heard it? You know, don't tell your neighbor, tell me. And guess what? I got it for her, whatever it was, and we made it happen. So most arts teachers, I guess, are not bashful, but some are. And so don't be afraid to verbalize what your needs are, but be appreciative of and aware of other programs as well. It's always a balancing act.
Any comments from your level?
I would say it's communication. We, as a district, we haven't done this for the last couple of years, but when the budget was so tight, we went and did a traveling roadshow, per se, with all of our staff to educate them on the budget and the constraints and what we were facing. And I think that it's really important that we do that with our faculty and our staff so that they understand why we spend the money, where we spend it. And I believe we're going to have to probably redo that again this year with teachers, with our support staff. We've spent time talking vision and why we spend money on maker spaces and all of the different things, so that they understand when they're out in the community that they can talk to why we spend what we spend. So I think with the arts and music people, when they come to us, you know, I had a conversation with the music department chair, and we're bursting at the seams at the elementary program. These gentlemen have taken a program that probably had about 50 kids in it, and we've got like 102 kids. We don't have enough instruments, and we've got to figure out how to get instruments. So they're being creative about how to find. They found this guy a couple towns over that repairs instruments, and I don't know. We're doing some different things like that, but they really need that teacher, and we really don't have the money for the teacher. Our Title IIA money was cut this year. Everybody knows that. So, you know, we lost around $35,000 in my district, and any extra money that I had couldn't really go to personnel because we can't sustain that over time. So instead, we said, okay, we'll compromise a little bit. Let's try after-school lessons. Let's try something that's a little bit outside the box that maybe might work. Now, I'll be honest with you, the after-school lessons have not been going well. The kids don't want to stay. They have other things that they want to go to. So we need to go back to the drawing board. But I think that the most important piece is when I meet with him, that I'm honest with him about where we are and the money that we spend. Because honestly, the music department is one of the highest budgets in the district often because of the expense when you compare it to like the math department, for instance. So I think that they need to have that situational awareness of where they are in the big grand scheme of things. And I think that relationship will help then us contrive some good ideas about how to fix the problem.
And it's really important of you being transparent from that level
Yes.
of really putting that out. I mean, this idea of kind of taking a tour and telling, your staff, here's what we're working with. And I imagine part of your message is we're all in this together. And I think that really shows at your level, you're trying to make this work for all students and everyone in the district. So we hear so much talk about advocating for the arts and being an advocate, and sometimes that's like a dirty word thrown around because I guess it depends how we define what advocacy is. And not necessarily even talking about teachers, but kind of to you, what is an effective advocate for arts education that is a community member or a parent? What is an effective way to really advocate for programs? I mean, what's the takeaway? What's the advice for people that you might have?
Are you talking about people within the department, or are you talking about parents?
Community, parents.
Well, I'm always a big believer in numbers. If your numbers are high, if involvement is high, if participation is, like you said, they're filling up the space in your school, it makes people aware so that when that edict tries to come down and say, well, we may have to cut, I've got parents running to the board meeting by the hundreds, not by one or two complaining. So what I've worked on for most of the time was making sure that the parents, the taxpayers, whether they had students or not, had access to the music and art that was going on in the schools, wherever it was, usually middle school and high school, and that I was always present at those, so that there was a common denominator for all of it. It's challenging when you have that many. I have 3 concerts a day sometimes, but you do what you have to do. But I think what happened was it kept growing the numbers to the point where we had more percentage of the school involved with music and art than we did with athletics. And at that point, we started to feel at least a little comfortable about our position on the budget. So I think that it's important that those advocates become the parents or the non-parents who are taxpayers who get something out of your program, who get invited up to, we invite them up to a meal before some of the winter concerts and the spring concerts. Senior citizens, at a certain time, they're allowed to come up, and we give them, we feed them, and then take them to the orchestra concert across the quad from us. So that they're involved, so that if we have to raise a little bit of the school tax, and part of the reason is they have to put in a new sound system at the auditorium because the other one was terrible, there's no balking because people are getting something. They're proud of it. It becomes a community sense of pride. And I think that's the best advocacy that I can get is the results that we give them just in numbers and presence. That's why I said to you, I spend a lot of time getting our groups out in the community. So on all the different homes and all the different meetings at churches and things like that, there's always a group or a quartet or a chorale or someone entertaining during the holiday time. So it's always Parkland. So people realize we're out there. I just think it's really important to be present so they don't know anything other than what they see. So you can explain them all you want about how great your theater program is, but get them in to see a show and have a good time, then they're going to be supportive of it.
That's a metric then that you can go back
Correct.
to administration and say, look how many people have.
Right. The best compliment I ever had was we were sitting at anecdotally, I was standing at one of the concerts, one of the middle school concerts in the high school. We seat 1,500. Every seat was filled and people were standing. And the principal of that high school said to me, boy, if they ever decide to cut music in this school district, they'd have to have the board meeting at the football stadium because of the complaints they get. And I thought that was quite a compliment.
Any thoughts on being effective advocates?
Well, I just want to make sure there's a counter argument to what, because if you're sitting back there today and you say, I don't have big numbers in my program, you still have a good argument. You want to say, you need to invest more in my program, because how else am I going to build my program up? So don't be discouraged.
No, and
if
I
your
did
numbers
that.
are not
No,
there.
you're right. They were not that high, and we did go. Exactly the argument used for the marching band was, if we're going to build it, we're going to need more uniforms. So
Absolutely.
yes, absolutely, I agree with you 100%.
And that investment doesn't always mean I need $50,000.
No.
That investment might be making the schedule work, and I think it's. Would you agree? It's important for those teachers to come with an ask of not just give me this, but I want this because this is what I think it will do.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thoughts on community engagement or advocating that way?
Well, coming from an urban, we had our own special problems about engaging community. But one of the successes that we had was by looking for every single little opportunity we had to let our kids shine in front of their parents. And then their parents became advocates. For instance, monthly literacy nights that the school would have. We made sure that there was the chorus performing, or even if we took, like if I was teaching flutophone, my favorite time of the year, but if we were teaching flutophone and we had the kids come and perform for the literacy night, we made sure that every opportunity where we could just get whatever numbers of parents were coming in, that we could get their kids in front of them. And it paid double, because then more parents also showed up for those literacy nights, and then you became important to your principal, because the principal was like, oh, this was the best literacy night we ever had. And you knew that's because my parents showed up.
Right. Do you have any thoughts?
Well, I'm not sure about advocacy coming out of the community, but if I was an educator in one of these areas, I would be advocating for the kind of skills that a child learns by being in my space. And so it would be about the fact that what better place for them to learn how to think critically, to be creative, to be innovative, to collaborate, to problem solve, to learn about grit and resiliency. In the arts, in music, in PE, in all of these areas where they actually have to, and I don't want to say perform, but they actually have to put themselves out there and be out of their comfort zone. These are the places where children grow. They're not going to grow if they never have to put themselves out there. And so I would advocate for the arts on that side of things. I know it has nothing to do with money, and I know it has nothing to do with all of those other things, but if we're really going to create or generate or produce well-rounded children who are holistic in the skills that they have, the arts is the best place to do that.
Absolutely. Question from the audience?
I think Dr. Clapper pretty much answered my initial question about, if you're trying to build a program, you don't yet have the numbers, but you need the resources to get the instrument to build the numbers, so that's kind of a paradox. But on that same plane, since we have a few rather experienced people in administration and in the greater community up there, I'm in a position where I'm rebuilding a program from the ground up, and I don't have nearly the resources that I need, and I've gotten some great ideas here today about how to continue that process and advocate. What I am struggling with, and maybe you can't help me with this, is the plain and simple fact of life that the facilities aren't there. It doesn't matter if I have enough instruments and tons of kids, and I do have a waiting list of kids. if I don't have the facilities in which to teach them, because we've been pushed out of our band rooms by STEAM, and we've been pushed out of our classrooms because our schools are overcrowded, so the music room is now a third grade classroom, and there is no instrumental music room anymore. So that is if we're going to talk about acquiring additional facilities that don't currently exist, we are talking about a huge expenditure. So I just wondered if you had any advice on something that's that major. I had a feeling that was crickets, but thank you for thinking about it and listening to me.
Well, the question I have is this a band program?
Actually, this is a string orchestra program. I'm in
Okay.
Harrisburg City Schools. So we're a financially distressed school district. We're under a chief recovery officer, and we're overcrowded because we've closed half of the buildings in our district. And yeah, so we've been pushed out. We're teaching in cafeterias, we're teaching on stages. We don't have lockable space, we don't have facilities.
Well, I'll tell you that a number of my elementary schools, as STEM came in, and because STEAM would help you, STEM. Anyway, as STEM came in and as we needed more and more space for special ed and everything else, and they were moved into closets and they were moved onto stages, and they had to sort of reconstruct how they would do it, and then find the time to put together the ensembles even after school sometime. Now, I don't know your situation there, and I'm certainly not going to judge whether or not you can have, if you have a late activity bus. I don't want to, everyone has a different demographic, but we were able to do that until such time as some expansion came. But to this day, I have a person who teaches, well, my band and my orchestra teacher at one of my schools teaches on a little room offside of the stage. When they can get on the stage, they can, but when they can't, they can't. So it's not an uncommon problem. It really isn't. And certainly, they're not building an addition for us to teach, strings and band orchestra.
Okay, thank you very much.
I actually have another question from the audience. We'll do that first.
Didn't mean to cut you off.
No,
My
go for it.
apologies. I actually have two questions. One of them is with regard to a uniform curriculum. I'm a music teacher, but all of the arts in my school district, York City Schools, are experiencing this. We have a wide variety of resources. I am fortunate enough to have gotten xylophones through Donors Choose, but some of my music colleagues in other schools don't even have a classroom. Some of them don't have instruments like I do, and yet the district is pushing for us to have some kind of uniform curriculum. What would be your suggestion for us to acquire the exact same resources first, or is there another way to proceed? Sorry.
It's okay.
Because we do want to be uniform, because we have a very transient population. And it is rather difficult because we have zero budget, including our art teacher who spends thousands of her own dollars every year.
I'm not sure I have the question, though. Can you rephrase that or say
Sure. So would you say it's more important for us to have like a uniform curriculum that we teach the exact same thing, similar to how the ELA teachers have like a scripted curriculum that they teach? Or do you think we should have concepts in place that we all teach in some way, but it's implemented differently? Does that make sense? Okay.
I think you do what you're comfortable, and it's just me now, what you're comfortable doing where you live and work. I don't know that there's a straight up answer for one district versus another district, or one building versus another building. I mean, I think there needs to be a set of objectives and skills and et cetera that everybody agrees to, but the methodology by which you go about achieving that should be left to the artists.
So we have a couple of music teachers who are very aggressive on the internet with those GoFundMe type things, whatever they're called, and she has got all kinds of drums and all kinds of xylophones and stuff. But the other ones that weren't interested in it, they're still teaching their music. They're just not teaching it maybe as interestingly as here, but the music is still being taught, so they're still getting that education. You can't make unless the district's willing to buy it across the board, there's nothing you can do about that.
Right, and even if they were, some of our music teachers and art teachers at some of our buildings don't even have classrooms, because like the other lady was saying, you know, we have also been experiencing an influx of children coming somewhat from the closure of like charter schools and whatever, but I appreciate your feedback with that, so just do the best we can. The other thing, and this actually comes from the presentation earlier about arts education in Pittsburgh public schools, we don't have a music supervisor right now. And they made it clear in that presentation, I think that was Dr. Kimberly Cruz. Yeah, she mentioned that, you know, in order to facilitate growth in the district, that a music supervisor would be extremely helpful. How could I, as the general music teacher, help the district see the importance of getting someone on board like that in that position to help grow our district's arts program?
Are there supervisors in other domains and other subject areas?
We have like curriculum coaches, from what I understand, but there's no one that directly oversees us whatsoever.
I think you have a good argument to make. I mean, that's your argument right there.
Yes, I think it's more a matter of money. So do you think that that is something that the could possibly be facilitated by the district, or is there like grant funded positions available?
Who does your evaluations? I mean, do you have a department, do you have anyone, I mean, there's an assistant principal or?
My principal does my observations.
Okay. It just seems to me that if they can't afford a full-time person, a lot of school districts use someone who's in the classroom already and either give them a period off for something a day or a stipend. It's not a full salary to help out in that area. That's not necessarily as effective as a full-time person, but it's better than nothing.
That
That's
would be
a good way
better
to
than
start.
nothing, yeah, thank you for that suggestion.
Are the curriculum coaches that are in your district already full-time positions, or are they just an extra stipend for
I
someone?
believe that they are grant funded at this point.
But are they a stipend, or is that what somebody's totally
They're year to
dedicated?
year, so I believe it's a stipend that they reapply for, if I'm not mistaken.
So they're a teacher, but they're a regular teacher, but in addition, it's an additional duty.
I'm gonna say no. I don't think that they're an actual teacher. No, wait, you know what? They just rewrote the curriculum for ELA last summer, and I believe it was a group of second grade teachers that did theirs and a group of third grade teachers. So yeah, what you're saying, I think they got paid a small stipend. So maybe the music teacher should take charge and one of us should like, yeah.
Then just like,
All right, thank you.
Let me just back them up by saying that's exactly what I did. We had a need for someone to be in charge of music, and of course, Harrisburg and York were brother and sister here on many issues, and that's exactly what happened. I was relieved for 2 periods a day to be music coordinator, and which didn't leave much time to travel around from school to school, but that's all in your scheduling. Get your free periods in the morning or at the end of the day. You would have to work that out. But and then as they saw the advantage to it, they gave me more time. So it's something you have to build slowly.
And I think that's a more common solution than you know what you have in Parkland, where there's a sole person. That's a very common solution, that it is someone in the department and it's one of those arrangements, if there's a little bit extra money or it's some planning time. So I'm going to kind of change the subject area a little bit, but again, if you have anything to add, other questions, please feel free to come to the microphone. So the big buzz in education, of course, is ESSA, the Every Student Succeeds Act. We heard a little bit about it this morning, and I'm sure you've heard a lot about it over the last year or so, and it's really ramped up here in the last month or two as Pennsylvania has put together their plan. So I'm curious, as some folks who've certainly paid attention to this, I would presume, and know a little bit about what ESSA is going to do, what are your thoughts on where this goes for the arts? How can we start to leverage this language or have the conversation to include in our school districts and our individual schools the arts, and have that conversation through ESSA?
well, one area, of course, is professional development. And so every teacher, regardless of your subject area or certification, needs professional development, ongoing development. So I would just say, make sure when your district and/or building is developing its plan, professional development plan, that you are at the table and have an opportunity to give input into what your needs are. I really believe in differentiated supervision and evaluation of teachers, and if you have such a plan in your district, if you don't, first of all, you should. And what that means basically is not everyone needs the same thing. And professional development is critical. I'll just tell you a quick story. One time I was a principal, and we gave all the teachers professional development time on a half-day early release that they were all working on developing their own syllabi. I wanted everybody to have their own syllabi and work it all out. So I started walking around through the building, and I came across the instrumental music teacher who was restringing a guitar. And I said, "Really?" And he said, "Well, I'm a music teacher. It's different." I don't think so. So I don't view your work any different than any other teacher that's in the building. You have your own standards and goals and objectives, what you want to deliver, and that should be clear in your own mind.
And the federal ESSA law, at the professional development point, calls for content-specific
It does.
PD. So that's important to be in that conversation.
I think the magic words for me in ESSA is a well-rounded education and the fact that we are now core subjects. So this is, I think we all need to look at this as an opportunity that we need to grab onto, and we've heard the word advocate a lot today. So it's time to take that opportunity and advocate through words and action. Like he said, you need to be at the table for professional development. Make sure that they're talking about your curriculum. You just have to take this ball back at home and go for it and make them aware. Another opportunity for a district like York is that the low-performing school districts are now getting a little bit more funding through ESSA, we hope. And so there you have a funding stream that could possibly bring you some more funding. Yeah, I know. A funding stream that you could possibly grab onto through that one. And also ESSA addresses STEM/STEAM. So you may want to actually advocate for STEAM in your district and make sure that you're an important part of the STEAM program moving forward.
So let me go to the administrative side of this again as far as ESSA goes. So even though technically ESSA is the law of the land, okay, we're living under ESSA, and we've actually been living under it for last school year and this year. It's not implemented in any state. And even the states that submitted their plans earlier in this calendar year just really got approval of those in the last couple of months. So arguably even in those states, it's not really implemented. So we're over a year into the new law and it is not implemented anywhere. So in Pennsylvania, as you heard this morning, where we are with this is, okay, so the state plan has been written, it's submitted to the feds. The feds are going to come back, and there's going to probably be a little bit of a conversation, a tussle back and forth of, well, you should change this. Yes, we'll change this. No, we won't change this, whatever. This is still a couple months down the road before we see a finalized plan, but I think the basic blueprint is fair to say is what you heard this morning, and that's probably what it's going to be. My question is, from the administrative perspective, have you heard about this? Has there been anything coming down the pipeline to say, here's what we're going to expect you as school districts and at the school level to do?
Actually, go ahead.
Well, I would say we have heard more about college and career readiness indicators and plans versus anything else that is in ESSA at this point.
Yeah, I think there's a fair degree of treading water, is the way I would say it right now, because of not having approval from the feds. And there's just a lot of ball's up in the air, and relating to different components of ESSA. I mean, one of the things that we are very much opposed to as a Principals Association is Act 82, which is educator effectiveness. And that was one of the 4 buckets, if you will, that is in the ESSA plan, was to take a look at that, because Act 82 is written into law, unfortunately. And we would like to see that change. So we advocated for moving away, at least not fully 100, I'd like to be 100%, but moving really more into the Danielson domain for the framework for teaching, and less looking at scores, et cetera, having an impact on your evaluation. But that's up in the air too. So I would just say stay tuned, and when approval comes, which I don't think is going to be quick, I have to tell you, be ready.
So to that teacher evaluation point, so we're going to be living under a couple levels of evaluating schools. There's going to be the data that has to go to the federal government, that's just required in the federal statute. Then we're still going to be living under what you're all living under as far as teacher evaluation for Act 82. But now we're throwing another ball into that mix in this Future Ready Index, and my read on that is that's PDE's way to say this is where we would start to like this to go. So you folks under the dome, can you join us? Maybe this is kind of PDE nudging to maybe change the law. So I'm curious then, what is your take on this Future Ready Index that we've got some details of, but not the complete picture?
It's a step in the right direction, I'll just say that. And I don't think you're at the where you'd like to get to at the end, but I think you nailed it. It's trying to nudge it in a different direction. And so that I agree with. Rome wasn't built in a day. So we are, if you could just put me in charge and say, change the evaluation system and make it, I'd be happy to do it. But no one's going to ask me that. I'm fairly certain of it. So we're just going to have to keep talking to legislators and et cetera, and show them the error of their ways with Act 82 and make changes in a positive way.
One of the other interesting things out of ESSA that I've spent a lot of time on at the federal level, and now as we move to the state level, is this Title IV fund. So you heard about that a little bit this morning. So Title IV is about the well-rounded education. Okay, so which now with all these subject areas listed. So anytime in the big 1,000-page law that you see the word well-rounded, it means music and the arts. It means all those other subject areas too, but those are the ones that we're obviously most concerned about. So this Title IV funding is now this pot of money that's designed to go to help support a well-rounded education. So that's basically what it said at the federal level. And then it's up to the state to decide, okay, how are we going to dole out this money, and what does that mean at the district level? So the feds were kind of cheap and didn't give as much money as they said that they would like to in the original law. So it's about a quarter of what they had originally planned to put out there. So I'm getting slightly into the weeds here, but there's a reason. So what happens is this money is divvied up to the states, okay? And then this time around, because the money was just so little, states had the option to distribute that money competitively to districts or through some other type of competitively based process. Well, thankfully, Pennsylvania did not do that. I was kind of fundamentally opposed to the idea of doing it competitively because it's kind of against the spirit of what the law is, a well-rounded education for all students, and then we're going to make you compete for this tiny pot of money. So the law states that if it's over a $30,000 allocation to a school district, which is not a huge federal allocation, but it's still $30,000. But if it's over $30,000, a district has to do what's called a needs assessment and say, this is where what we have in these subject areas or this sector of what we do, and here's where we're deficient. And then they can spend the money, there's certain restrictions basically. But if you get under $30,000, those restrictions go away. So in Pennsylvania, when you dole all this money out, the minimum any district can receive is $10,000. So if the formula breaks down and you actually are going to get under 10,000, they have to kind of redo the formula and give another district a little less money. So point being, the vast majority of school districts for this school year are getting $10,000, okay? What my question is, and that was probably a long question for an answer that I probably already know, but I did it anyway. So I've heard business managers in school districts say, yeah, we have this allocation on our federal funding for $10,000 for this Title IV thing, and I have no idea what it is. So my question is, as a district, okay, you're going to receive, every district, go on PD's website, it was on Dave's handout this morning. You can go and see exactly what your school district's Title IV allocation is. Is it a fair assessment to say that there has not been any guidance provided to you on how to spend this money and what you're supposed to do with this money for this school year?
Yes.
You have your thought on that?
Well, it was in the Title I funding, in the consolidated application, and one of the areas to spend it on was mental health, and that's where we're spending it. So it's offsetting the cost of a liaison to have in the building. So there were 6 or 7 specific areas that we were to identify and then set goals for.
But I do think it's fair that most districts don't
It just
have a plan.
Well, it just popped up in the consolidated application when my Title I coordinator was doing the application, and she called me and said, okay, what are we going to spend this money on? So then she and I collaborated and discussed what we would do with it.
But you're right, that's what's happening
But
all
that's-
over the place.
yeah.
People, we have this money, what do we do? So you need to know that money, there's money there.
Yeah, so you can go find out what's there for your district, and I think, and as administrators, you can yell at me for saying this, but I don't think you will, I hope you won't, but as an educator, you can go and say, well, our district received this much money. Go and ask what that money's being spent on, and if they don't know, then and honestly, I don't think it's of any fault of their own, because we're living in this weird wild, wild west of, are we in ESSA or are we not in ESSA? I mean, we're in ESSA, but it's not out there. What is this money being used for? And if not, go figure out what it can be used for and how you can advocate to use that money.
And I would say be creative, because now I, as a superintendent, have $10,000 more than I didn't have before. So now I have $10,000 in my budget that I need to spend, and boy, wouldn't it be nice to buy some instruments. Okay, so there you go. That's what we do all the time. You just reallocate. So go with a plan and say, hey, I know we have this money. Can you help me out? Because I need this for my department.
So buying some instruments completely fits under that definition of a well-rounded education. Because you are now providing opportunities for students who otherwise wouldn't have that opportunity. I mean, if you were to go and do a needs assessment, you could say, we are deficient in this area because we have more students who want to participate in our program than we have instruments. So do a little bit of that research.
I just have a quick question. Are you talking about mental health for like professional development needs or social and emotional health of the students?
When we realized that we had the money, we used it. We had already allocated or budgeted $20,000 for a mental health liaison in our district. So then when that money came along, we said, okay, we'll take that $10,000 and allocate it back to that mental health professional, which frees up $10,000 somewhere else that now I can spend on instruments or something else. So I mean, it's robbing Peter to pay Paul, in a
It's a bit
sense.
of shell game.
Yeah, shell game.
So let's move on then to the bigger, broader topic of school budgets. So if you follow how the state is funding schools, the state does not support schools at the amount that they did 20 years ago, 30 years ago, okay? The amount coming from the state level. And now, to add on to that discussion, there is lots of talk about property tax reform. So there's a bill talking about completely eliminating it. On Tuesday, you will be voting on a potential amendment to the Constitution that would, the state constitution, that would change how schools do property taxes, that could change how schools do property taxes, that could allow a district to essentially eliminate property taxes on all the homes in that district. There will be people who will advocate for that, I'm sure, and find reasons to do it. There are people who find reasons not to do it. But regardless, my point is, this is a huge new ball game here for education funding. So the budgets the last couple years have been kind of crazy in Pennsylvania, okay? Just looking at what happened this year, where we passed a plan to spend the money, but we didn't come up with a plan for funding that until months down the line, and most of that is contingent upon borrowing. That doesn't make me real sure about the idea of a budget that's going to increase education funding next year, because where are we going to come up with that money? So my question is, how do we get creative? What do we do come school budget time, again, when a school has to turn their budget in before the state does, and they have to guess what the state's going to give them, basically? What do we do? What are the challenges, and how do we face them in education, funding-wise? That's an easy one, right?
Well, it's a heck of a challenge. I mean, with our legislature and our legislators, the way things are operating now has made it incredibly complex. I mean, I'm actually glad I'm not a school superintendent right now, the last 3.5 years, because of the way that our lawmakers are not handling or not addressing a serious budget issue. Thankfully, there's been, I'm trying not to get political here, but there's been good leadership at the executive level in Pennsylvania wanting more funding for basic education funding. That's really not a statement of politics, that's a statement of fact. And so there have been some increases in basic education funding in the last 3 years, to the tune of $200 million one year, $100 million another year, maybe a total of $400 million, something like that in the last 3 years. But that doesn't get us anywhere near where we need to get to, and so it's problematic, and I'm fearful, truthful for the 18-19 budget, because it's an election year, for a variety of reasons. It's an election year, there's a lack of courage and foresight among our legislators. But I would ask, again, I'm going to say the A word, advocate and speak up to your legislators. And don't just say, yeah, we really ought to do that and not do it. Do it. I mean, have a conversation with them, send them an email, call them, see them, do whatever you need to do, but we need collectively to get all over Harrisburg and say, look, what we do is important. Educating our future is important. And so we need as much advocacy as possible. Just on a side note, there is a budget, the ballot question you talked about. If I could just say that, address that real quickly. If you're going to vote on that, if you're going to vote on Tuesday, I hope you are, up or down. And I would say the vast majority of people don't have any idea what that ballot question is about. And so I would suggest that you research it. I invite you to go to PA Principal's website, to go to PSEA's website, to go to PSBA's, go to their websites. And yesterday, or day before yesterday, there was a webinar, and it's out there too. I think it's on PSEA's website. And look at the webinar and a PowerPoint, and it explains exactly what that ballot question is about. I'm less concerned about that, frankly, than I am other legislation that could come about in the future, namely Senate Bill 76 and House Bill 76, which right now are law, but that is complete elimination of property taxes in Pennsylvania to be replaced, well, allegedly, complete elimination of property taxes in Pennsylvania. If you study the bill, it really isn't. Pardon me? Sales tax, PIT, personal income tax,
the money's
manna
not there,
from
so-
heaven.
Treasure chests.
Manna from heaven.
You know, I don't know. I mean, the answer is, those are spooky bills, I have to tell you. I had a meeting yesterday with PSEA, PSBA, PASA, and PASBO, the business administrators. And we're already scheming, or it's not a good word, but planning on how to go to the legislators and show them how this is such poor legislation. So advocate, advocate, advocate.
Any other budget-related thoughts? Okay. If there's any other questions from the audience, come up to the microphone now. But if not, I just kind of want each of you to maybe give a little bit of a takeaway. What's their homework? You know, I go and I speak at band concerts all the time, and I always tell the parents that, okay, your students have done the homework, now here's your homework, and it's to go and praise what just happened. It's to go and thank your administrators for allowing this type of program. So I always like to give the audience homework too. So I'm just curious for any takeaways that each of you might have as for those in the room and those watching on PCN.
Well, I think that anyone who attended, and a lot of them aren't here right now, the very first thing you have to do tomorrow is go to whoever approved you to come here, thank them for giving you the opportunity to be here. And if it's not the superintendent, then send an email to the superintendent or your board or your school board director, thank them and tell them what an informative session it was and how you realize how much challenge they face and what can we do to work together to make these things, because too many times you're pitted against each other. There's contract negotiations, you're not, and I think that we need to approach this as a group. The superintendent's offices, the principals, and the school boards, along with the teachers, need to work together for some of these bigger issues like advocacy and tax changes, which could completely change the environment of school districts. Thanks.
I would say the most important commodity of any school is children. And anytime you have an opportunity to put children in front of board members and the community, or if not the actual children, their work, by all means do it. And that goes an awfully long way in your advocacy work for the arts.
And then I'm going to put on my association hat here, and because there's not only PSEA, but there are many associations that are involved in Today and supporting Today. Whatever association you belong to, become involved with it. Become involved to advocate. The tools are there through the association you belong to. We assist our members with making those contacts with the representatives and the legislators. As was just mentioned, there's a lot of things out there in legislation and budget issues that are kind of scary for us as public school teachers, whether we're in the arts or not. But we have to be involved and we have to advocate for that. It's not so scary, trust me. If you've never met with your legislator, they're just like you. Don't be afraid of them. And we can give you, I know we can give our members, I know you guys do it, I know all of our colleagues through associations across this state are very good at giving you the tools to advocate for your issues. So just go to their website, contact one of their representatives, and they will help you become an advocate on a bigger level for your desires.
And I would just add that, you've seen and heard a lot of things today, and you have some deep-seated desires in your heart or things that you believe about the system that you're within. I challenge you to not go back to your district tomorrow and do the same thing you've always done. Do something different based on what you learned today. gather some evidence, and then go to the supervisor and find out what you can get generated for the arts. It may take you a couple years, and it may take some persistence. Get in front of the board, get in front of the right people with students in tow or student work in tow, because that is I think the most impactful thing for board members to see is to see children and to see their work and to see the value in what they are trying, the decisions they make, to see that they actually connect to what a child experiences every day makes the difference. So you can only do that by gathering evidence, by doing something different than you've always done. So I challenge you to walk away from here doing something different and gather that evidence to fight for what you believe in.
Fantastic. And let me throw one other takeaway as far as we talked about this ESSA stuff. Don't be afraid to ask questions about it. I do that work for PMEA. Dave does so much. I mean, we've read all of this. So we know so much about ESSA just from reading and seeing what other states do. So as this goes into implementation, please feel free to reach out to us. Do you have a question?
In March, Music in Our Schools Month was an amazing opportunity to show your school district what your children are doing. There are so many opportunities to sing at the Capitol, like
Right.
30 days, performances a day, and besides the self-esteem, you actually get to be your platform and sing for the senators and representatives who are trying to influence your platform. So Music in Our Schools Month in March.
Absolutely. So it's finding all those advocacy opportunities. So join me in thanking our great panel and for providing so much great information for us. Thank you all, and I'm going to turn back over to Ron for some closing remarks.
Mark, thanks very much. Great job. Thanks again to our panelists. Appreciate you being here, and thanks for all of you who hung in here throughout the day. Just a couple of quick reminders. If you've not filled out the Act 48 form, this session is also eligible. Form is in the back, but again, you need to fill it out. Secondly, appreciate you completing any of the evaluation forms for this session and sessions throughout the day. The PowerPoints, to the extent that they are shared with us by the various presenters for the plenary sessions as well as the workshops, we'll put them on the website. If we have your email address, we'll pass them on to you, or at least pass along to you the links. Give us a few days to get all that stuff straightened out before you start to ask, where is it? Again, thanks to the many speakers, the many panelists that we've had throughout the day. Thanks to all those individuals who submitted proposals to further enrich the program today. A lot of the workshops came in unanticipated, but invited and most welcome. And if we do this again in subsequent years, I'm sure we're going to be following a similar procedure, inviting ideas, inviting proposals from all of you in the field. Again, we appreciate the student participation and certainly those students who performed today or were otherwise recognized. I want to thank our financial sponsors who allowed us to bring this at a very reasonable rate for a full-day conference. And again, certainly thank our friends at PCN for their cooperation. They take this message across the state, and we very much appreciate that. That wraps it up. We appreciate you being here. Have a great day, and thanks to everybody who contributed in so many ways. Thank you.